The human warship plowed through the alien front lines, its howling sirens echoing across untold star systems. Panic erupted throughout the command centers across the galaxy. No one had anticipated humanity's technique so quickly breaking through their defenses, unleashing fear on a massive scale. Dread consumed each sector. This single human warship rained havoc upon the alien alliance. For decades, they had viewed humanity as a weak, primitive species and undeserving of serious notice. Their scouts had taken note of Earth's meager resources and its spacefaring vessels, and had deemed that any incursion by human warships would be easily checked. But now, the reverse was the case. Only one warship had penetrated the tightly prepared inner perimeter, avoiding early warning systems that, only a few years earlier, had provided a 100% detection rate. The worldwide embarrassment provoked furious debate among alien strategists, each of whom was eager to point to the underlying causes of such catastrophic failure. Top commanders held emergency meetings at far-off starbases. Sensor logs were examined, frame by frame, replayed. How had they managed to hide their drive signatures? Why did the automated turrets not engage until it was too late? Panic spread through the ranks of the alien force as each individual of them could guess what they were facing was intricate stealth technology, at least 20 times the level they had been engineered. Meanwhile, lesser officers muttered rumors. Perhaps not all those calling the shots were technological geniuses, but rather that the humans' instinctive grit in the face of stress and chaos took charge and let them break through the front lines so decisively. Fleets deployed along the border sprang into action. Cruisers and battleships turned toward the area that had been breached, creating makeshift blockades. Reports poured in about the human vessel's extraordinary speed. Attempts to jam its communications failed, creating confusion and panic. War planners scratched to maintain order, deploying explains little fleets to intercept even, tailoring them not to underestimate the intruder. But the more they examined the early engagement data, the more it became apparent that this was no ordinary craft. Its weapon signatures did not fit simple classifications, allusions to hybrid technology appropriated from the unfamiliar. Some of the outer patrols had already run into the warship and paid dearly. Burned rubble fields and mangled hulls attested to the unerring accuracy of the human gunners. Survivor. Pilots reported blistering energy bursts that overpowered shields, then blazed at speeds that left them no time to counterfire. This level of tactical sophistication ran counter to every assumption the alien empire had made about Earth's capabilities. What had previously been dismissed as implausible rumor, human creativity commandeered to fashion instruments of war, loomed before them as a self-evident truth. Over star charts and strategy boards, one dot burned in bright red. The trajectory of the human warship indicated it was headed for the main command network. If unopposed, it could start disrupting essential supply routes and undermine forward bases, delivering a crippling blow to the entire front. Bureaucracy delayed attempts to muster a coordinated response. Some regional leaders pressed for luring the human vessel into an elaborate trap, while others called for an immediate, all-out attack. Dissent brewed, muddying the chain of command. Even the most battle-hardened of her admirals, the ones who had conquered entire worlds without batting an eye, showed signs of unease. They witnessed the heady mixture of technology and gall that was powering the human incursion. The prospect hung heavy that their entire strategic posture was obsolete, that the humans had developed novel tactics capable of unraveling the Empire's once indomitable lines. The bray of triumphant proclamations, bemoaning a speedy defeat, fell flat in the face of the evidence accumulating that the intruder was no blunder. In marble-floored, hushed corridors, alien officers murmured doubts about whether the human species had been underestimated for far too long. Maybe their ferocity and tenacity for survival had finally created a war machine the likes of the galaxy's best. The morale of the troops plummeted as rumors spread. Uncertainty began to eat away at them, fraying the pride of an empire accustomed to effortless conquests. When the official command broadcast ordered all fleets to converge, some captains complied immediately, others hesitated. The strategic catastrophe was palpable, and each second of delay was one more for the human warship to slip between pickets or ambush unsuspecting patrols. Civilians on distant colonies heard the news and readied for chaos, uncertain whether the conflict would soon come knocking on their doors. No one knew where the warship was going to strike next, only that it moved methodically towards something of high value, and that conventional defenses were impotent to halt it. This incursion was now a stark warning that comforts and assumptions around the Empire were dangerously flawed. Nobody had ever breached this area of space before. The entire frontier was built to repel massive invasions, not stealthy single-vessel maneuvers. If one human craft had pierced these lines so easily, how many more? After that question, more than any other, fed an emerging sense of panic. The Empire's command chain was racing to respond, but the once solid unity was splintering from confusion and terror. The warship's dramatic arrival would prove to be a watershed in the war, and that alarm would be blaring across all sectors, drowning out all other concerns. As frantic transmissions echoed through the stars, senior officials finally reached one crucial consensus. The human warship had to be eliminated at any cost. A large requisition of firepower began, and fleets were ordered to vacate lesser postings. War factories churned out theoretical munitions in industrial quantities, as if numbers would compensate for the unanswered question of human ingenuity. But even with such grand preparations underway, a creeping doubt remained. No one really knew if the Empire's combined strength would be enough. Well behind contested borders, the human warship moved according to a carefully orchestrated plan, born of desperation. It was the last stand of a beleaguered species, a last hope forged under the crucible of unrelenting pressure. Scientists, engineers, and tactical planners had joined forces to conceive something radical. Experimental drives once tried only on Xeno's ships and layered stealth fields and modular weapons gave the ship unparalleled versatility. The crew, selected from the smartest scrappers the survivors had to offer, knew the odds they were against. But they all agreed that the blockade must be breached if humanity was to have more than a snowball's hope of gaining back its territory. Inside the warship's cramped command center, every console lit up with readouts displaying the disordered front. Weapons specialists tracked fluctuations in their grid as stealth experts worked to manage rapidly shifting energy profiles to confuse enemy sensors. Although the vessel had minimal hull plating, its shield emitters could adapt in real time, channeling energy to the most at-risk locations. Unlike alien models that involved non-moving brute force shielding, the humans preferred wits and adaptability to raw bulk, a strategy that had enemies gasping in shock. The ship's primary weapon was a marvel in hybrid engineering. Rail torpedoes, capable of launching kinetic warheads at relativistic speeds. Upon striking, these slugs shattered even the strongest hulls. To enhance this brute force, the warship mounted gravitic distorters bundling gravitons to bend local space, to break enemy formations. Though still experimental and prone to misfire, they offered an unexpected advantage, allowing smaller craft to slip away unscathed or raining devastating blows on tightly knit fleets. But technology alone doesn't ensure success. The warship's true strength was in its crew's fierce resolve. Many had seen entire colonies collapse, losing loved ones to raids or forced evacuations. And they came to this mission because surrender was unthinkable. Their unity had encouraged creative tricks that flouted conventional military doctrine. Simulations indicated that, if they could reach certain choke points in the alien network, they could disrupt key supply lines, compelling the enemy to divert valuable resources from the siege of Earth. The ship walked radio silence as it worked its way further up the hostile system. Human settlements were kept at a distance, with only flurries of encoded data passing between them, ensuring that no operational secrets passed outside the fold. The captain plotted a course along gravitational eddies to scrub energy signatures. Even with these precautions, detection of the warship was unavoidable. The front lines teemed with scanners and picket fleets. 8:90 the moment it announced its position, the whole enemy net would converge. So timing was everything, he said. Every hour that went by without an interception was a blessing, in the sense that it gave the warship time to get into position to deliver a potentially decisive opening salvo. Tension gripped the crew. They knew that the Empire was counting on them, mustering hundreds of ships in a desperate attempt to seal the incursion. They had one opportunity to break through before the enemy's net closed completely. The corridors echoed with the hurried footsteps of engineers triple-checking power coupling, preparing fallback shield generators, loading munitions into automated rails. Each understood that any mistake, however small, could doom the mission. Still, there were glimmers of hope in their eyes, signs that they felt a future they once believed they had won could still be captured through this final roll of the dice. As the warship finally advanced into the strike position, the crew huddled around holo displays, dissecting each known alien defense grid. They singled out clusters of vessels with overlapping arcs of fire, corridors filled with interceptors, heavy facilities, covering critical junctions. The maneuvering would need a feint that would pull most defenders to one side, leaving the warship's specialized weaponry free to bear down on a soft flank. No simulation could have accurately predicted the enemy's reaction. But if human ingenuity had any power, the first blow would break the blockade. The moment came with a hush of anticipation. Lights fell to combat alert levels, and a single chime heralded final readiness. Treasuring the trajectory approach for grab and shoot in a row, the weapons officer labeled several targeting solving alien capital ships. The stealth field pulsed, calibrating itself to counter enemy scans. You wait, then you eye the main display, waiting for a signal. Without a word, they prepared for the surge of adrenaline that would accompany the warship's devastating fire. Either they would cut a route to freedom, or they would die, abandoning Earth to its fate. There were no words, just heartbeat after heartbeat of discipline pouring out, resolute and steely-eyed. The first confrontation exploded in strength like a solar flare. As the warship's stealth systems powered down, alien scanners immediately homed in, setting off a storm of defensive fire. Torpedoes and charged beams fell from all directions, coloring the dark with violent spangles of light. But the human vessel had anticipated this reaction. Roaring to life, its engines spun it into an expertly spiraling maneuver, which the targeting algorithms were all but helpless to meet. Bolts of energy flew off, exploding harmlessly against the void. Reacting with stunning speed, the warship's main battery fired a volley of kinetic slugs at the closest enemy cruisers. Projectiles sliced through shields and pierced armored hulls, sparking secondary explosions. Leaked, twisted metal spun away, with gaping holes where bristled cruisers once were. Alien frigates, desperately small by comparison, scrambled to intercept, but the warship's point defense lasers took them out turn after turn, turning their missiles into harmless tracer flares. Unfazed, the alien fleet withdrew to regroup. A few destroyers sprinted ahead in close formation, concentrating overwhelming fire at one segment of the warship's protections. The flesh and blood craft bucked in response, the vessel's energy shields flaring as they absorbed blow after bruising blow. Inside the control room, power relays shrieked and alarms rang. The pilot diverted auxiliary reserves to shore up the fatigued quadrant, while the engineers redirected coolant to stave off meltdown. Sparks rained from overloaded panels, but the shield held. Spotting an opening, the warship's crew engaged a gravitic distorter. Ravens bite twisted space around the enemy formation, throwing their vessels off kilter. The destroyers, pitched perfectly in formation at 102 meters per second per orbit, staggered as gravity bent their trajectories, inducing a forced breakup. Taking that moment, the warship rolled and opened fire with another volley of railgun slugs. 3 destroyers shattered in the onslaught, their hulls folding in iridescent arcs of flame. The surviving alien captains withdrew, driven to distraction as they struggled to re-establish coherence in the face of such catastrophic tactics. But reinforcements flooded in from the flanks. Heavy cruisers designed to survive long sieges. They let loose with capital-grade beam cannons, each blast capable of gutting a lesser ship in moments. The warship's shield flared dangerously, cracks racing across its surface. The pilot lurched, darting between explosions of blasts, vaporizing fields of debris from previous skirmishes. Every swerve defied convention, demonstrating the agility that alien admirals had once claimed impossible in human-origin craft. The barrages increased, but the warship's strategic officer battled back with clever misdirection. Drones launched from concealed storage, generating fake sensor returns and decoy radars. Alien gunners, bewildered by contradictory readings, hesitated, or wasted shots on ghostly targets. The ship swooped beneath a lumbering carrier, releasing a cluster of explosive charges along its exposed belly. The carrier's engines exploded in a chain reaction, flinging it into an adjacent battleship. The two ships disappeared in a cataclysmic explosion that rocked the entire sector. Even with the warship's successes, the numbers stacked against it were staggering. Waves of fighters streaked in, raking the vessel's shields with pulse lasers. A couple of them found gaps in the flickering barrier, searing the hull and crippling secondary weapon emplacements. Internal compartments vented atmosphere as emergency bulkheads clanged shut. Amid the smoke, damage control teams fought fires and closed ruptured conduits. The crisis seemed to threaten to spin out of control, but the crew's discipline never failed. They were patching leaks and cutting rerouted power, buying precious seconds for the gunners to bring additional systems back online. In the swirling chaos, the warship found the command cruiser of the enemy fleet, the beat of an armored craft coordinating the entire engagement. High-level transmissions from that ship were detected, leading the human strategists to suspect that if they could neutralize it, they could paralyze alien coordination. They plotted a straight course, shooting their way through the barrage of interceptors. The pilot performed a daring barrel roll at the hull of a stricken battleship, then spun around to face the command cruiser head-on. Realizing its imminent demise, the cruiser fired a last stand of its own, a salvo of experimental plasma torpedoes that was said to burn through any shield. The warship's point defense turrets fired, sending several torpedoes off course. One still slammed home, showering superheated matter off the shield. The warship remained operational, but energy levels dipped dangerously. As the cruiser readied for another barrage, the human vessel discharged all RAF rail guns at once, concentrating all that destructive power on a single point in the cruiser's armor. There was a deafening roar that rolled across the field when the hull of the command cruiser buckled. Down the corridor past fire, through the breach, along hallways loaded with munitions. The subsequent chain reaction shredded the ship into a brilliant eruption of radiance. Shockwaves shook the alien formations, and for one moment their order broke down into chaos. Many alien captains, suddenly realizing that their central command node was silenced, vacillated, opening up desperately needed holes in their defenses. The warship took advantage of this confusion, driving further into the front lines. Wreckage drifted all around them, alight with residual bursts of energy. Alien ships were forced to fall back or scatter, unable to mount a collective counteroffensive. An hour later, they had single-handedly shattered a defense perimeter that, until then, had been perceived as virtually impregnable. The warship had broken the aliens' illusion of invincibility, and while the toll it took in damage and strain was steep, the road ahead beckoned, pushing humanity's hope onward. The unexpected collapse of their command cruiser sent alien admirals reeling, scrambling to reassert control. Desperate to snag their human foe, they devised a reckless plan. Gather their remaining capital ships into a thicket formation, forcing the intruder into a pincer in increasingly narrow and dense crossfire. Smaller ships would protect the flanks, preventing any attempt to outflank. If executed correctly, the humans would find themselves surrounded on all sides with no escape. To give their trap some credence, the aliens pretended to be in a desperate situation themselves, sending out distress calls and deploying a few battered frigates around an apparent weak point in the blockade. The plan was to bait the warship into firing on what looked like a weak spot, only to trap it in a brutal crosshatch of overlapping fire. Tactical displays showed the corridor growing thick with cruisers, each one maneuvering to cover the next gap. A net of drones, orchestrated to swarm in waves, lay in wait for the moment the warship arrived. Within the human vessel, the tactical officer sifted through intercepted transmissions, trying to connect the dots in the enemy's plan. However vague the particulars, one thing was clear. The aliens were massing an uncomfortably large concentration of firepower in one sector. There was a lot of debate among the crew whether to move forward or change course, but time was running out. Reinforcements from deeper within alien territory could arrive at any moment in bad, if not dire situations would be rendered impossible. It all came down to the captain's call. They would punch down the corridor before the enemy had a chance to fully seal it, banking on the warship's advanced speed and surprising tactics. All systems were up to maximum readiness. Non-essential functions had power cutoff, which maximized the thruster's output. Railguns were loaded with munitions, including a few prototype warheads never before tested in active combat. There has never been a better time to bet on untested tech. As the warship moved towards the corridor, it was raining with a flood of enemy gunfire. Pulses of plasma lit the void, and sophisticated homing missiles locked onto the ship's energy signature. The pilot had to zigzag, traipsing through deadly arcs. Even so, a number of hits landed, chewing up much-needed shield capacity. Smoke poured into a forward compartment as a blast tore through the plating. Medics raced to contain casualties, and repair drones scurried to seal breaches. The trap sprang on the alien side of things. Colossus cruisers spewed focused beams that lanced across the corridor like a killing cage. Smaller ships buzzed along the fringes, raining ion bursts on the warship, aiming for its power grid. Fighter drones swept in waves, harassing the flanks of the vessel and trying to pick off any external weapon turrets as they isolated them. Explosions erupted, and sirens blared. Withstanding the onslaught, the human warship pushed on relentlessly, no longer shy to a fight. Sensing that brute force might not be the answer, the alien admirals ordered boarding pods to launch. From concealed bays, these pods delivered elite strike teams trained to breach hulls and disable ships from within. They gripped the warship's bottom, slicing through damaged armor. The incursion threatened to change the course of the war, because even the most powerful warship was susceptible to sabotage deep in its own territory. In a heartbeat, human security teams sprang into action. Hallways erupted with a collision of curling sparks and intermittent gunfire. Intruder alarms screamed, and automated defenses killed. Engineers struggled to maintain key systems online, while repelling troopers wielding disruptive grenades. But while the infiltration had caused serious harm, the warship's defenders showed the same grit that had brought them this far. They funneled the intruders into kill zones, taking them out one squad at a time. In the end, the few remaining boarders retreated, evading themselves in escape pods that floated into the crossfire outside. Meanwhile, the jaws of the corridor continued to close. Cruisers moved, steadily closing the net. The human vessel's shield generators strained, flickered under the unrelenting bombardment. The pilot maxed the engines, hoping to speed through the last blockade. But a ring of carriers now blocked the way, their hulls bristling with recently commissioned strike craft. It looked impossible. In that instant, the warship revealed its secret weapon, a next-generation warplance torpedo intended for short-range deployment. The crew zeroed in on the carrier formation and opened fire. Pulsing with exotic energy, the torpedo burned a short, bent tunnel through space itself, just outside of normal space-time, skirting microscopic defenses. The carriers had precious little time to respond. One fell victim to a searing explosion. Two were demolished by shockwaves tearing through their ranks. Taking advantage of that moment of confusion, the warship pushed forward. The alien trap fell apart as the captains hesitated to shoot over friendly fire. The corridor designed for the humans' death was the humans' narrow path to victory. Over the anguished cries of the engines, the vessel slipped through the gap, leaving bulwarks of battered cruisers and wreckage in its wake. The gamble paid off. In defiance of all logics, the human warship had escaped the trap, dragging behind it yet another testament that desperate innovation and human spirit could succeed where raw numbers failed. With the corridor left behind them in flames, the human warship pressed on towards the heart of the alien front lines. The survivors were scattered, the units uncertain to regroup or flee. The annihilation of critical carriers and the loss of several cruisers had broken the aliens' faith. The myths circulated through the broken fleets as quick as fire. The human ship carried wonders that could not be described. Some whispered it could warp space at will, others swore it had limitless firepower. Fear took hold. Capitalizing on that confusion, the warship's crew braced for their final strike. Finally, sensors detected a vast alien command station located at the intersection of important pathways, organizing reinforcements and logistics for the entire sector. If this station fell, the blockade would go up in smoke. To penetrate its defenses, The warship would require every last bit of power left. Sections of the hull were burned black, shield capacity was reduced, and weapon systems had been subjected to punishing loads. But the mission called for them to persevere. Long-range scans confirmed a formidable defense grid encircling the station. Automated turrets on rotating platforms, overlapping layers of shielding, and a whole squadron of battleships holding orbit. A single wrong move could mean a swift end. But now to turn back would throw away the momentum that was bought with so many sacrifices. The crew braced themselves, going over every detail of the assault plan again. Munitions were diverted to the railguns, shield modulators recalibrated for precision, the gravitic distorters primed for one last use. As they neared the station, the warship issued no surrender or negotiation. There would be no parley this far into enemy territory. Instead, it gunned to attack speed, triggering a chain of alerts across a myriad of alien channels. Turrets spun to put the intruder in their sights, battleships rushed into formation, and missiles shrieked toward the warship's outline. There were explosions in quick succession. The pilot banked sharply, dodging deadly strands of energy. Each impact depleted the warship's shield, each near miss burning new scars into the hull. Then the warship's coordinated strike followed. Rail cannons fired in concert, tearing through the outer ring of turrets. Gravitic distorters rippled space as the battleships had to split, lest they collide. One hapless battleship, taken by surprise, crashed onto a defense platform, exploding in a fiery display. Others attempted to reorient, but the warship exploited its advantage. Drones poured out of concealed bays and hit critical systems around the station's perimeter. Drones disabled power relays, towering turrets crumbling into clouds of shrapnel. Under the sustained bombardment, layers of shield around the station started to buckle. The warship raked fire at a single generator cluster, blasting with a storm of kinetic slugs and plasma bursts. The station staggered from internal explosions, whole decks going dark. Panic-stricken alien officers rushed to re-establish defenses, but fragmentation bombs from the drones incapacitated backup systems. The barrier, praised as an impregnable wall, was collapsing in real time. Sensing impending doom, the surviving battleships made a last stand. Their volley combined pounded the warship, compelling it to redirect scarce energy to its ravaged shields. Secondary plating was blown off by explosive impacts. A howl rang through the compartments as it lost pressure. But the human vessel would not submit. The pilot pulled the stick and shot for the ceiling, hugging the top of the station's upper axis, where fewer guns tracked. The rail cannons, despite the tremendous damage wrought upon them, still had enough charge for one last, definitive volley. That salvo came as a thunderclap. Slugs hammered into the station's hull, punching through armor, impacting its main reactor. A blinding wave of light erupted from deep inside the structure, plunging outward in concentric ripples of destruction. Power signatures all across the station went dark, one by one, until the final, detonative blast freed the massive facility's geometry. The shock waves sent debris flying in all directions, battering the nearby battleships. As its stronghold shattered into drifting fragments, the alien fleet lost its last thread of purpose. A few vessels tried to engage, but the warship's defiance had drained their will. Many broke formation, turning and fleeing in a race to escape the approaching maelstrom of gravity unleashed by the destruction of the station. All around, shattering ships fled, a maelstrom of twirling wreckage in their wake. Panic and dread streaked across alien command lines. No formation, no technology, could stop the advance of the human warship, it was reported. What was left of the once cohesive blockade broke into small groups of battered ships. The way to the front line's deeper networks was clear. It had torn through the enemy's best, breaking its strongest lines and sending shivers of panic across the galaxy. It was bleeding and hanging on by a thread, but the ship had done the impossible. Still wreathed in smoke and sparks, the warship floated among the devastation it had wrought. Shattered pieces of the alien station drifted aimlessly, sparkling with the final embers of fires inside. Distant starlight sparkled off metal shards, a reminder of the blockade once considered impervious. Now, the silence was deafening. No more alarms screamed. No more volley after volley of plasma, igniting the darkness. Where the front lines had once been a wall of impassable flame was shattered rumble. Inside the warship, weary crew members secured damaged compartments and triaged the wounded. Makeshift fixers had maintained the hull. Crew members limped through hallways, burned skin peeling and bruises blooming, but relief sparkled in their eyes. They had ignored every apocalyptic prediction and shattered the bonds which would suffocate humanity to death. Weather beaten but steadfast, the ship stood as a testament to human fortitude, an immovable dagger thrust into the heart of enemy territory. Word of the breakthrough spread at light speed. Allies and enemies on distant worlds looked on in disbelief. The blockade's defeat was a local victory indeed, but it was also a readjustment of perceptions about alien superiority. Overcrowded sensor nets and blighted command nodes laid entire sectors open to liberation. Revolts broke out on the worlds they occupied. Syndicate this article, copy the link, tweet this article. Rebellion leaders who once dispersed into remote mountain strongholds emerged emboldened, calling their followers to arms under a banner of human defiance. Even planets that had never dreamed of open revolution were now weighing their options in hushed council chambers, embers of hope smoldering again where once all was dark. Even so, the price could not be denied. The warship itself had been on the brink. Basic systems were on the verge of collapse. Arm stock lay all but empty, and structural integrity was compromised in several sections. If reinforcements were to strike now, little capacity to do reply. But no immediate counterattack appeared to be in the works. The alien empire had turned the other cheek and now was staggering in humiliation, seeking to regroup. It had been chaos in the chain of command, admirals casting blame on one another for underestimating the humans. Some senior officials even called for ceasefires or negotiations out of concern that either side would be totally destroyed if the fighting continued. Drifting among the debris, the warship sent coded messages toward hidden human enclaves, reporting success and requesting any available support. Its crew yearned for rest, but they knew the battle was not over. That blockade was only one obstacle. Further in alien-held territory, new regiments and orbital superfortresses awaited. But for the first time in so many cycles, humanity had dominion on the momentum. They had demonstrated that no frontier is really safe in the hands of minds willing to fabricate everything and anything to get the job done. In the end, cracked hulls brought mute testimony of courage and fear. Scorched columns of plating listed confusingly between half-melted weapon barrels. Wreckage of torn fighter wings floated alone in vacuum like silent witnesses to the cataclysm that had just taken place. The whole region recoiled from the sounds of violent confrontation, as if the star-spangled void were gasping for breath. The ship's success spread through subspace channels. Distant allies rejoiced, while alien garrisons quaked at the thought that they might be next. Debates flared up among neutral factions, wondering how best to survive in this new era. Were they to side with humanity's unstoppable ascension or cling to aging alliances that had just been shown to be brittle? For the crew that had risked everything, there was no time to celebrate. Too many lives had been lost, too many compartments were irreparable. Still, they bore a renewed sense of purpose. The blockade's demolition had liberated entire systems from a chokehold, providing a preview of a galaxy in which humans could exist unafraid. It was unclear how that future would be defined, though continued war or negotiated peace. But one fact pierced through all conjecture. The human warship's incursion had entered a legend that no empire could erase. As the ship reclaimed the remains of its energy and headed for a more secure rally point, it left a wound on alien honor. The knowledge of this defeat would taint every plan, no matter how the Empire sought to reorganize. They had faced a lone vessel and assumed they'd have an easy win. Instead, an unstoppable wave of human will had broken their lines and scattered their armada. Now, the galaxy awaited the next stage of a war that would not cease until one side fundamentally comprehended the commitment of the other. The front line that had once flowed along this very threshold lay shattered, and the legacy of this day would stoke the fires of bloodshed for generations.